Welcome to History at the OK Corral. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and share this episode with a fellow history lover. And now, on to tonight's episode. Natchez, Mississippi, September 19th, 1827. Just as the late summer sun nears its noontime apex over the Mississippi River, two boats paddled their way through the muddy water towards a small island. With the clear blue sky and warming temperature, the seemingly placid scene might be mistaken for a group of picnic or party-goers making their way to their much-awaited destination. But the business at hand this morning is of a far more serious nature. On this morning, a feud between two prominent local citizens, one Dr. Thomas H. Maddox and one Samuel L. Wells, will be settled. Both men have agreed to settle their long-standing enmity in the form of a pistol duel. After what has amounted to months of negotiations as to the time, place, and conditions of the duel, they have agreed to meet at this neutral site of this island ensconced in the middle of the river. Each are accompanied by their seconds and their surgeons. Among those in the boat with the Wells party is a steely-eyed 31-year-old who, though not one of the duelists scheduled to fight that morning, has set his mind on settling a score of his own on this day. The man's name is James Bowie, otherwise known as Jim Bowie. Born in Kentucky in 1796, Bowie's family had moved to Opelousas, Louisiana in 1812. Here, on the ragged edge of the American frontier, he had grown up hard as the ninth of 10 children. He is known as a man not above working outside the confines of the law, having spent considerable time running what amounted to 19th century real estate scams and capturing and returning escaped slaves to bondage with his brother throughout the 1820s. However, on the frontier, where the rule of law is often seen as more of a subjective measure than an absolute dictate, this has not wholly soured his reputation. Bowie is, in fact, known by many as a congenial, thoughtful individual, quite the conversationalist when he has a mind to be. However, he is also known as a man not to be trifled with, and one not known to forgive a slight to his honor lightly. And on this day, Bowie has his sights set on one Major Norris Wright, a member of the opposing party, and a man whom Bowie has a long-standing, bloody feud. The year prior, Bowie had returned from one of his many trips made in efforts to proffer his ongoing real estate scheme, in which he and his brother John Bowie attempted to lay claim to and sell off parcels of land that did not belong to them. Stepping off of the riverboat and onto the shores of Alexandria, Louisiana, Bowie had been informed by his brother that Wright had been demeaning his reputation about town, calling into question his character and castigating Jim Bowie as a thief and a liar. This was an affront that, in the eyes of Jim Bowie, could not be suffered. He had immediately made his way to Bailey's Hotel, armed with only a pocket knife. Here, he found Wright engaged in a card game. Bowie immediately demanded to know whether the rumors about town were true, and whether or not Wright cared to repeat them now in person. For his part, Wright drew his pistol without so much as a single word, centering the sights on Bowie's torso. At the same time, Bowie had reached up for a chair that was close at hand, raising it up to block himself from the brunt of the forthcoming bullet. For a few tense moments, the pair stood frozen in a standoff, until Bowie had raised the chair above his head in order to attack Wright. Wright had fired, striking Bowie on the left side. The shot had ricocheted off of a coin pouch Bowie carried under his vest, causing only a painful flesh wound. Bowie then lunged at Wright, knocking him to the floor and holding him down with one hand as he struggled to pull his folding pocket knife out with his other. With the blood-soaked hand being too slick to pry open on its own, Bowie placed the blade between his teeth in order to pry it open. The knife was then wrenched from his hands by Wright's friends as they desperately tried to separate the two men. With the knife now gone, Bowie sunk his teeth into the hand of Wright. Finally, he was pried from atop Wright, leaving one of his teeth embedded in Wright's fingers. Though the two were separated, their feud was still unsettled. Bowie was taken upstairs to recuperate, and tensions continued to rise for months. In today's duel, Norris Wright is a member of the supporting party for Dr. Thomas Maddox. Many members of both parties are uneasy that the feud between the two duelists will not be the only conflict settled that day. As the boats pull onto the Sandbar shore of the small island, Bowie departs the vessel with the rest of the cohort supporting his friend, Samuel Wells. For roughly 20 minutes, the particulars of the precise location to be used on the island and arguments over who will be allowed to accompany their fighters ensue. Interspersed with these heated conversations are the repeated protests being offered up by two members of Dr. Maddox's party, James A. Denny and Robert A. Crane. They urged both duelists to settle their differences in a more amicable fashion and lament the forthcoming bloodshed, but neither participant can be dissuaded from their aims of settling their feud with pistols. For his part, Bowie remains distant from the proceedings, resting under the shade of a small grove of willows. Though he is ostensibly there only to support his friend, he is keenly aware of the presence of his hated rival, Norris Wright, as a member of the supporting party for Dr. Maddox. In fact, other members of each party have long and torrid histories with one another. Richard Cooney, a member of the Wells party, and Robert Crane also have a long-standing, heated feud themselves, in which Crane has recently threatened to shoot Cooney on sight. These underlying tensions swirl beneath the collective apprehension of all the men now on the small island. Finally, though, matters are settled in preparation for the duel at hand. As Bowie and friends remain under the willow trees, Dr. Maddox and Samuel Wells now take up their pistols, march to their determined positions, take aim, and fire. A large cloud of smoke then obscures the beach as the onlookers brace themselves to see the result. However, in an instance not uncommon in frontier duels, both shots have missed. Attempting to seize this brief but seemingly fortuitous moment, Dr. Denny makes another hardened plea for both participants to set aside their arms and settle their differences peaceably. But again, he is rebuked, as neither Maddox nor Wells feel their honor to have been satisfied. The pistols are reloaded, and again, the combatants take their places, aim, and fire. But, in a miraculous stroke of luck, both shots, again, miss their mark. Finally, with both men feeling as though fate has been amply tempted, Maddox and Wells agree to shake hands and lay their dispute to rest once and for all. Maddox makes his way towards Bowie and the rest of his party, heartily proclaiming that amends have been made and that he intends to now share a glass of wine with his former rival. Maddox, Bowie, and company now make their way towards the party of Samuel Wells, with most in the group being overjoyed at the peaceful outcome of what could have been a tragic affair. However, while Maddox, Wells, and most of the others are in a jovial mood, the pre-existing tensions between both Richard Cooney and Robert Crane reach a flashpoint. As the two parties reach within earshot of each other, Richard Cooney calls out to Robert Crane, saying that, since Crane had previously threatened to shoot him on sight, now would be an opportune time to settle their differences here on the beach. Again, cooler heads on both sides attempt to argue for a peaceable solution, and beseech both men not to break the newly garnered peace between both groups. However, before the situation can be diffused, weapons are drawn. It is unclear who drew their firearm first, but within seconds, several men on both sides, including Jim Bowie, had their pistols drawn and ready to bear. Again, though, the men are convinced to halt in the interest of mutual peace. The men in each party all holster their weapons. All of the men, that is, except for Robert Crane and Jim Bowie. For a fleeting few moments, the armed men are locked in a standoff, unsure of the other's intentions or next moves. Then, suddenly, believing Bowie to be the leader of an ambush, Crane fires his shot first at Bowie. The bullet misses Bowie, as did Bowie's return shot, which, in the closest shot yet of the day, managed to graze the cravat that Crane wore around his neck. But now, any previous peace deal is presumed moot, and full-on, blood-drenched frontier chaos ensues. Crane immediately draws another pistol from his waistband, firing another shot which misses Bowie but strikes his hated rival Richard Cooney in the thigh, severing an artery. He then turns and sprints towards the grove of willow trees in hopes of escaping the retaliation of Jim Bowie, who is now in hot pursuit of the man who has fatally injured his friend. Bowie draws a second pistol himself and fires upon the retreating Crane, but again misses. Now, out of options by way of gunpowder and lead, Bowie reaches for the large, leather scabbard on his belt, which contains a gift from his brother, Resin Bowie, made for just such an occasion as this. Sheathed in the scabbard is a large knife, measuring 9 inches in length and 1.5 inches in width, with a crosspiece set above the handle to stop the user's hand from slipping forward. After Jim Bowie's earlier fight with Major Norris, Resin Bowie had given him the knife as a gift, stating that this weapon would not require loading nor present the danger of misfiring. Now, in a fury, Jim Bowie draws the knife as he pursues Crane, angrily calling out, "Crane, you have shot at me, and I will kill you if I can." Crane, in a panic, and now with no more shots to fire, turns and desperately hurls one of his pistols at Bowie, striking him in the head and nearly buckling the knees of his pursuer. However, Bowie, now in a froth, continues his pursuit, seemingly otherwise unfazed by the vicious blow. Dr. Maddox now rushes to restrain Bowie, but is quickly thrown off. But then, momentarily, Bowie, now feeling the full effects of the vicious blow to his head, staggers to a large driftwood log and leans upon it wearily in an effort to collect his senses. Meanwhile, at the same time, the rest of Crane's friends, including Bowie's hated rival Norris Wright, rush to assist their comrade. Wright approaches the temporarily disoriented Bowie, pistol drawn. Seeing this, Bowie indignantly rebukes him, "You damned rascal, don't you shoot." Seeing Wright approach, one of Bowie's friends hurriedly hands him a loaded pistol, and within seconds, both Wright and Bowie fire at each other from mere yards away. But, again, both shots miss their mark. Now, Wright draws a second pistol, and Bowie, out of arms and ammunition, calls out to his enemy, "Shoot and be damned." Just before Wright has time to shoot, James Denny, also a member of Bowie's party, grabs Bowie by the shirt collars and demands that the violence be stopped here and now. But again, the cries for peace are drowned out in the storm of unfolding violence. As the melee unfolds, shots ring out once more, with George McWhorter, another one of Bowie's friends, firing a shot that strikes Norris Wright in the left side. Wright then fires at Bowie, whose shirt collars are still firmly in the grips of James Denny. The bullet hits Bowie in the chest, puncturing a lung, and tears off one of Denny's fingers in the process. Wright cries out that he has been mortally wounded, but in reality, he has only sustained a flesh wound. Jim Bowie, though bleeding profusely, struggles free from the grips of Denny, and now, in an animalistic fury, pursues his long-hated rival Norris Wright down the beach, with his long blade still glistening in his hand. Bowie manages to catch up to Wright, but just before he can land a fatal blow, 2 more shots ring out from 2 more of Wright's friends, in Alfred and Carrie Blanchard. One of these bullets strikes Bowie in the thigh, bringing him to his knees on a small strip of sandy beach. Now, both Wright and Alfred Blanchard draw their sword canes, a relatively common weapon in the area at the time, and move towards Bowie in hopes of delivering the coup de grace. But, despite repeatedly striking Bowie, neither are able to inflict a mortal wound, as Bowie defends himself with his own blade and by deflecting blows with his arms and hands, incurring several more injuries in the process. The brutal affair reaches a grisly culmination when one of the men's thin swords becomes embedded in Bowie's sternum, bending the blade and rendering it temporarily inextricable. Then, in what was later characterized by one of the witnesses as a, quote, "wonderful exertion," Bowie pulls himself into a seated position, and like a mad tiger swipes at and grasps the collar of Norris Wright, who, in struggling to free himself, inadvertently pulls Bowie to his feet. It is in that instant that Jim Bowie's reputation is solidified forever. According to his own later account, he seethingly whispers to Norris Wright, "Now, Major, you die," before driving the blade deep into his chest, killing him instantly. However, the fight is not over. Now, the body of Norris Wright collapses onto Bowie, pinning him to the ground, as Alfred Blanchard continues to try to inflict a mortal wound on his now trapped opponent. However, by this time, Bowie's friends have made their way to his aid. Now, Thomas Wells fires a shot that strikes Alfred Blanchard in the arm, just as Bowie is able to free himself and scramble to his feet. Bowie then manages to strike one final blow, a nasty gouge to Alfred Blanchard's side, before the melee is finally brought to a halt. In just under 90 seconds, Jim Bowie has incurred several life-threatening wounds, inflicted several himself, and managed to eradicate his longtime enemy. Now, as the effects of his adrenaline begin to fade and the pain of his wounds sets in, Bowie is tended to by several of the physicians present. As the doctors work, Robert Crane, who had first shot Bowie, approaches. Though he had long sought to settle his score with Norris Wright, Bowie and Crane have had no prior history of confrontation nor violence. Now, Bowie calls out to Crane. "For God's sake, Crane, assist me, give me some water, and help me to the shade." Crane, having no personal animosity towards Bowie save for the last few minutes of combat, acquiesces to the request and brings Bowie water, before helping to carry him back to the shade of the island's willow trees. On their way to the trees, Bowie, grateful for the assistance, simply remarks, "Colonel Crane, you ought not to have shot me." In the end, 2 men, ironically, neither the appointed duelists for the day, are killed. From Bowie's party, General Samuel Cooney has died from the gunshot wound inflicted at the hands of Crane, while Major Norris Wright has fallen victim to the soon-to-be legendary blade of Jim Bowie. Alfred Blanchard has been badly injured by a gunshot and the knife wound that Bowie had struck as his final blow in the fight, but he will recover. For his part, Jim Bowie has been grievously injured. He is taken to Vidalia, Mississippi, where he spends 2 months recovering. In the interim, local newspapers begin to run the story of what would come to be known as the Sandbar fight, already cementing the folkloric nature of Jim Bowie and his deadly knife. Though Bowie will recover, his story does not end here on the shores of the Mississippi. Bowie will go on to live nearly another decade, finally meeting his end at the hands of Santa Anna and the Mexican army in the legendary Battle of the Alamo. While the life of Jim Bowie is one replete with legend and controversy, for tonight, the many tales of his life, as well as the battle in which he died, are other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click subscribe, hit the like button, and share this episode with a friend. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the join button below or click the link in the description to become a member on Patreon. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.